Hello, friends. Christine here with another Monday morning message. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. With Valentine's Day coming up this week, I thought it would be nice to look at a love story from the Bible. And of course, there are several good love stories in the Bible. The one I decided to go with is the story. It's a typical love story. It begins with tragedy and then it leads into romance and even ends with redemption. And I'm talking about the story of Ruth. It's from the book of the Bible by that name, Ruth being the main character, and short book, 4 chapters right there between Judges and 1 Samuel. It's a beautiful story, and so we're going to take a look this morning. It's too long of a story to read the whole thing for the sake of this video, and so most of you are probably familiar with the story anyway. In case someone needs a refresher or you're not familiar, I'll just give a quick recap. So basically, Elimelech and Naomi were an Israelite couple. They had 2 sons, Malon and Kilion. And when a famine came during the time of the Judges, they actually left their home and moved to Moab, another country. So they're God's chosen people. But because of the famine, they moved to another country where they're not in Israel. So they moved to Moab. Sadly, Elimelech passes away, and then their 2 sons marry Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah, and then the sons pass away. And so now you've got this woman bereaved of her husband and her 2 grieving daughters-in-law. She's brokenhearted now. She's lost her husband and her sons. And of course, these young women have lost their husbands. They're still young. They could have children and go on to have a successful years of marriage ahead of them. But these husbands that they married, Naomi's sons, have died. And so here she is with just her 2 daughters-in-law. She's in a foreign country to her, and she hears that the famine is pretty much over in Israel. So she encourages her daughters-in-law to go back to their own families and their own homes, and that she's going to return to Israel, back to her own homeland. Well, the daughters-in-law ask her to please let them go with her, but she encourages them a little more. And finally, Orpah decides to go back to her family. So she gives her a hug and she's crying, but she turns back to her own home. Ruth, however, begs and implores Naomi, please let me go back with you. I want to be one of your people. I want your God to be my God. I want to stay with you. She must have seen something in her mother-in-law that made her want what she had and to know the God that Naomi served. And so with much compelling, and finally Naomi gave in. Okay, if you really want to come with me, give up your family, then you can come with me. So Ruth and Naomi head off together back to Israel. And so when they arrive, Ruth offers to go into the fields to glean, to provide food for them. Naomi says, I went away full and I've come back empty. She feels like the Lord's been bitter toward her because of losing her husband and sons. So, but Ruth is younger. She's going to go out and glean. So she finds a field to glean in, and it belongs to Boaz, which is a relative of theirs. And so we're going to pick up right there when Boaz notices that Ruth is gleaning in his field. We're going to read Ruth chapter 2, verses 8 through 17. So Romans, Ruth 2:8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn. Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Then she said, I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. And at mealtime Boaz said to her, "Come here and eat some bread, and dip your morsel in the wine." So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her, and also pull out some of the bundles for her, and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her." So she gleaned in the field until evening. Then she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. So she spends a day gleaning in the field, belongs to Boaz. Now he's a wealthy landowner. He didn't leave Israel when the famine came. Perhaps he had grain plenty stored up for a time as that when a famine would come. But he's got reapers that are out there working. He's got women that come and glean in his fields. And when he finds out what Ruth has done for her mother-in-law, that she left her own people and came to a land she didn't know, he tells her that God will repay her. Think about her love for her mother-in-law, to give up her own country, her family, to travel to a new place that she's never been, and then to go out and work to gather food. That gleaning, and it sounds like, getting those grains and then beating them out, this was hard labor. This wasn't just like an easy, push mower kind of job. She's out there working in the heat of the day, no doubt, but she loves her mother-in-law. And so we see her love for Naomi, and then we see God's love for her, providing her a place to glean where she can be safe. And then God also putting her right in the relative's field, which we'll get to in just a moment why that's important. But he instructs them, the young men that reap for him, to leave a little extra. And when she gets home to Naomi, we didn't read all this. We won't have time to read the rest of the story. But Naomi says, "Where did you glean today? You've got like more than you would just get from picking up scraps." So she tells Naomi about Boaz and how kind he was. And long story short, they end up finding out that this relative, Boaz, was a relative of Elimelech, and that he is available to marry Ruth. And back then, love wasn't always just the, go meet someone, date, fall in love, get married, especially if you had a spouse that already had died. If a woman was widowed at a young age, a relative who was close was available to marry, he was supposed to marry that relative's wife, widow. So this is what Boaz agreed to do. And later on in the story, I wish we had time to read it all. It's awesome. But they come up with this whole plan, and it all works out because God is in it. And the really awesome thing is that by the end of the story, we find out that not only did Ruth marry Boaz, but then she has a son with Boaz. I may have time to flip to that real quickly. And her son, Obed, is the father of Jesse. Jesse's the father of David. This is King David, the great king of Israel, who we know so much about. But this line continued on, and King David is a direct ancestor of Jesus. Mary was a descendant of King David, and then of course Mary, the Virgin Mary, gave birth to Jesus. So here's this woman. If you think that God doesn't really love everyone and maybe he just chooses certain ones, this story should certainly put that thought to rest. He loved Ruth. He saw that she gave up her family to come to a new country, that she chose to worship Naomi's God, and now she is able to come not only into this family and to have a husband and to be able to go on now and have children, but she actually comes into the family line of Jesus. Jesus is a direct descendant from Mary, of course, his mother's earthly side. He's a direct descendant from Ruth. God loves everyone. He loves the foreigner. Deuteronomy 10 tells us to love the foreigner, the one who comes into your country. You were foreigners and sojourners in Egypt, and so the people of Israel were to love those and care about them and feed them and clothe them. And that is exactly what Boaz is doing. I've got this verse here pulled aside. Deuteronomy 10, 17 to 19. For the Lord your God is a God of gods and Lord of Lords, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who is not partial. He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. Love the sojourner, therefore, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. So God commanded them to love sojourners, people who are there temporarily from another country, who've been displaced. Love them. And here, Ruth is a sojourner. She's from another country. She's basically fatherless. She's left her parents back home in Moab. She's a widow. Her husband has died already. So she's all of the above. And Boaz carries out this command by God to love them and to provide food and clothing for the ones that are sojourners. What a beautiful story as we think about Valentine's Day and romance. What a beautiful story. They end up getting married and having a family. Boaz and Ruth are both great examples of love, and not just romantic love. So they got married. That's great. But Boaz, this love that God wanted them to show to people by giving food and clothing to the sojourners and the widows and the fatherless. And Ruth's great love to give up her family and come with Naomi to a strange land and serve her God and be part of her family. These two both showed God's love to family members, to others that they didn't know, to strangers. And then obviously love to each other and getting married and having a family. We see God's love and a great romantic love between these two. So I hope you've enjoyed this message today about true love, God's love, and romantic love from the story of Boaz and Ruth. And so let's be like Boaz and Ruth. Let's love others with God's love. And if you find someone that God leads into your life, if you're already married, wonderful. If you're not, don't just rush out to marry someone, but let it be someone that God leads to you. He certainly led Ruth and Boaz to each other. And so I just want to thank you for taking the time to listen to this message. If you enjoyed what you heard, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to my channel. And if you have any feedback on this message, feel free to leave it in the comments below. Well, that's all we have for today. And just remember, faith in God gives us peace in our hearts. Shalom.